Friends, boom bada boom. Russians had their walls shaking. More than 200 drones attacked Russia. A military airfield in Engels was hit. Strategic bombers that attacked Ukraine were damaged, as well as depots with FABs, KABs, and cruise missiles. Moreover, it is reported that Kh-555 and Kh-101 missiles for the Tu-95 and Tu-160 have been damaged. In Kuban, Russia, the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost 2 days now after a drone attack. The GUR successfully attacked Russian targets in temporarily occupied Crimea. Air defense systems, naval vessels, and a helicopter were hit, and 13 Russian radar stations were destroyed. And in Russia, they claim that the Ukrainian armed forces attempted to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? We will discuss all of this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svitan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Dear audience, please like this video and write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments. Roman Grigorievich, how many bombers were damaged? Because according to the information I have, there were several bombers there and one ill, which delivered the missiles. Here it says that in the morning, an Il-76 arrived at the base, likely delivering a new batch of A-101 missiles. And at Engels, there were 3 Tu-95MS and 2 Tu-160S. What do you think?
Well, they were definitely damaged. The question is, to what extent? Why? Because it was a large-scale attack, both with drones and most likely a missile. That significant boom, since it was indeed a very distinct boom. Then the fifth element that dramatically broke through the roof, if anyone vividly remembers that classic movie, was most likely, in all probability, one of our own powerful missiles, not ruling out even the possibility of using a long-range Neptune. In this direction, and naturally, the detonation that occurred after the strike, as well as the detonation of missiles, aerial bombs, and small arms ammunition, which are also loaded onto aircraft, damaged, of course, the planes standing nearby. They couldn't have escaped damage. The question is, to what extent were they damaged? I think within a few days. Our intelligence, our general staff will confirm this after collecting information from satellites and images, decoding them, in other words, using objective monitoring tools, and then we'll be able to celebrate again. Maybe in the next stream, we'll be able to confirm this with certainty.
Roman Nikolaevich, so what could have been hit? So the bombers themselves, a warehouse with cruise missiles and a warehouse with aviation fuel. In other words, these elements were the targets of Ukraine's weaponry, our missiles and our drones.
Any strategic bomber base is, just to give you a comprehensive idea, much like a sprawling, bustling large city where, in addition to the extensive airfield itself, a truly immense number of critical infrastructure facilities of various specialized types are actively involved and meticulously maintained to fully support its complex operations, starting from those located deep underground. Fuel storage facilities holding tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene and ending with various warehouses and SIS, most importantly, the Special Engineering Service for Missile Preparation, and of course, the storage of aerial bombs and missiles used by these strategic bombers. By the way, not many people talk about this, but further south of Engels, several dozen kilometers along the left bank of the Volga, there is another facility, the so-called Saratov 63. This is a nuclear storage site. More precisely, it is a storage facility for nuclear warheads for strategic and tactical aviation. In other words, there are significant stockpiles of the 12th GUMO, the 12th Main Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, specifically of tactical nuclear weapons. So just a few dozen kilometers away, and the mushroom cloud wouldn't be like the one over Engels, it would be a real massive one all the way to Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, the Kazakhs would see it themselves. It's just a shame. I have too many friends in Kazakhstan, so of course I'd hate to disappoint them like that. But nevertheless, this is a serious facility, and to take it out, not just with missiles or drones, to level it completely, you'd need several squadrons of bombers carpet bombing it. But if you blow up this underground, let me repeat, the fuel storage contains tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene, which is used by strategic bombers. A single bomber like the Tu-160 takes on board the equivalent of 3 railroad tank cars of this kerosene. More than 150 tons of aviation kerosene are loaded there, and for the Tu-95, it's 1 railroad tank car, which is also quite a lot. So there are definitely reasons to strike there. And regarding the damage that could be inflicted on all of these facilities, it could be catastrophic for the Russians. By the way, it was to Engels that we once handed over our 2 aircraft. Tu-160, Tu-95, Tu-22, our own Kh-55s. Hundreds of missiles were handed over to Kuchma back then. It was Kuchma who was dealing with this, at least at the time. And now, basically, we'll be trying to destroy what was once ours. The strategic bombers that were handed over to the Russians. As for what exactly was hit, that will become clear within a few days, once the satellite images have been analyzed.
Roman Igorovich, how many military personnel are usually stationed at such air bases, at military airfields?
Well, the thing is, they perform different tasks, and the area involved varies as well. There should be at least a regiment stationed there, that's for sure. About 1,500 Russian troops should be involved in this process. 1,500 to 2,000.
Could we have eliminated enemy personnel with these strikes, Roman Igorovich?
Well, definitely 100%. The thing is, even SIS, the Engineering and Technical Service, a special engineering service, naturally, there's also the security and defense of the facility itself and the storage of the missiles. Missiles aren't stored like matches after all. There are even certain climate control mechanisms in place, especially for missiles of this kind. So several dozen people were definitely taken out there, and the remaining hundreds were certainly cleared out by that strike. Believe me, the shockwave was felt all the way in Syria.
Roman Igorovich, it's true, the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost a full day now after the drone attack. And everyone is talking about the long-range Neptune, the modified missile. Let's discuss this missile as well as the strikes on oil refineries, bases, and on Kavkazskaya, which has been burning for almost 2 days now.
The sanctions of Malyuk and Budanov have now become the sanctions of Ukraine's defense forces. Why? Because in such strikes like the one on Engels, the security service of Ukraine and special operations forces were naturally involved. At the very least, that's the case. And probably also the Navy, if Neptune was used there, because a coastal missile system, at least the launch platform, is involved. But I think within a day, it will become clear. Long, Neptune Long, it's the same situation. That is, it's launched from a coastal missile system. Naturally, Mishpap is involved in this. The main targets for this kind of cruise missile, thank you. Targets that need to be hit. For example, after all, a 150 kilogram warhead is not the same as a drone's 20 kilograms or 50, whatever they carry. A 150 kilogram warhead can reach and detonate just as we see now. Presumably, let's put it that way for now, a warehouse with missiles and aerial bombs was blown up in Engels. Naturally, the same kind of warhead can do the job. The same applies to TUAPs or to breaching their detonation systems or at pumping stations. This is one of our main tasks right now. God forbid it gets stopped. Right now, all these people who are not part of our government are running around with the idea of how to secure the Russian hydrocarbon industry. So God forbid these strikes are stopped like they were last year. If last year, in May, the sanctions against Malyuk and Budanov hadn't been stopped, there wouldn't be any this year, because there would be nothing left to destroy. We would have just burned everything down last year. Now, it turns out they're trying to stop these strikes. The missile is very good. It's our basic missile, Neptune and Mailong, or Neptune. It's basically the X-35 missile. At one time, it was also produced at our facility with our engines for this missile. Turbojet engines, dual circuit missiles. It was an air-to-ship missile. That's its main purpose, meaning it's an anti-ship system. The missile was later upgraded to be able to strike ground targets, and with a good engine and additional fuel tanks, it can now cover more than 500 kilometers. So at the very least, it reached 500 kilometers to Toksi. I think it could have also hit Engels because they practically broke into a warehouse that was sealed. These missiles aren't just lying around outside. So since it was sealed and then broken into, it most likely means a missile got in. But there's no confirmation yet, so we won't confirm it either for now. This is just an analytical note.
Roman Igorovich, just to clarify for our audience, what is the range of this missile and what new opportunities does this open up for us? Let's make sure we record this now.
Well, the missile's range, at least the confirmed one, is definitely 500 to 600 kilometers. We saw this with TUAPSE and maybe now with Engels as well. Engels is a little over 600 kilometers away. And the actual stated range, so what does 500 to 600 kilometers mean? Well, that's like a semicircle from Moscow through Engels to Tuapse. Just draw that circle. That's everything we can reliably hit with this missile. And the stated range, 1,000 kilometers, you can set the compass at St. Petersburg, for example, and draw a semicircle almost reaching the Caucasus. So that would already cover areas closer to Kazakhstan. To the east, it would reach beyond the Volga, at least past Engels, past Astrakhan, closer to Kazakhstan. And to the south, this particular missile would indeed reach the North Caucasus region if its officially stated range accurately matches its actual flight range. Technically, this is possible. The engine is very good. Our engine, which we produce, it will definitely run for an hour, and the missile speed is 850 kilometers per hour. So running for an hour or an hour and a half is not a problem. The main thing is the fuel. So however many extra buckets you fill the missile with, that's how far it will fly.
That is, Moscow, St. Petersburg, and military infrastructure targets can be attacked.
Well, definitely they are already under such serious targeting. And in order for us to fully accomplish our tasks of ensuring the security of our border, we need to reach about 2,000 kilometers. Roughly speaking, we need to reach the Urals. It's 2,000 kilometers to the Urals. But as for a cruise missile, it's hardly worth it, for example, to make cruise missiles with such a range right now. Ideally, of course, either drones, they're a bit cheaper, or ballistic missiles. For this kind of range, either solid fuel or liquid fuel, that is ballistic missiles. I think if we don't solve this issue this year, we'll do it next year.
More good news. The main intelligence directorate successfully attacked Russian targets in occupied Crimea. Air defense systems, naval vessels, and a helicopter came under attack. 13 Russian radar stations were hit, including one L-125, not UBSV, not BSV, and the MISE radar station. How do you assess the work of the main intelligence directorate? As I understand it, all of this was done over a certain period of time, and it's now been documented.
Well, it definitely took several months. This is the work of Gurs, Beks, and Magur. The main intelligence directorate and the security service, their Bekis, practically from unmanned boats, they turned them into aircraft carriers. Both of them, both the Gurs Magur and the SBU CBB, they can now operate almost like aircraft carriers, carrying unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, and they can also carry unmanned surface and underwater vehicles, essentially functioning as both a mothership and a relay station at the same time. Here is a boat several meters long and of a certain width that can take unmanned aerial vehicles on board, for example, and approach the coast of Crimea or some other Russian territory somewhere closer to Novorossiysk. And from several kilometers off the coast, it can effectively launch and control drones under its direct operational command, utilizing the boat itself as a crucial relay station. The guys can carry out a combat mission just as they do directly with, say, those same FPV drones. That is, a certain type of drone, a UAV, takes off and then destroys a Russian radar system, an anti-aircraft missile system, or some other military target depending on its capabilities. Especially the Gurs Magura drones can also carry sea-to-air missiles depending on the launch configuration. This is the R-73 air-to-air missile. It's an excellent missile. It's already half a century old. Thousands of them have been produced, and we have those thousands. It has a thermal homing head. If you aim it and the missile locks on, it will chase down the target. And if there are two missiles, the Maguras can carry two missiles. So this also means the destruction of aerial targets. Here's confirmation of a helicopter being destroyed, and in fact, not just one. One was completely destroyed, and the second was seriously damaged. So in this sense, the GUR operatives have practically become naval aviators, I would say. In other words, the GUR has entered a field that isn't typical for them and has performed quite well there. And the security service under Malyuk, so the GUR under Budanov's command and the SBU under Malyuk's command. Under Malyuk's command, they are now using practically the entire range of strike capabilities. And what's more, they're producing them on their own bases, which is very important. These are intelligence agencies operating from their own bases at their own expense. Their budgets are still quite small. These aren't the armed forces of Ukraine. These aren't Umarov's billions or hundreds of billions, but still they manage to find sponsors on their own, most likely perhaps. And they accomplish tasks of this kind. Well, good for them. There's nothing more to add.
Tamar Nigovich, before we talk with you about the Belgorod region and the information from Russian military correspondents, I would like you to give a brief overview of the Ukrainian Grom-2 missile system. What are its potential capabilities and how should these capabilities be used? Please, the floor is yours.
To understand the process, what is the Grom-2? It's essentially the same as the Iskander in terms of range and warhead and in terms of its control system. So we have our own version of the Iskander. Several decades ago, a truly significant and well-conceived project was successfully launched, known officially as SAPSAN, as it was widely recognized and referred to. Based directly upon this foundational SAPSAN initiative, a powerful and robust solid-fuel ballistic missile system was subsequently developed, specifically designed for the Grom series of weaponry. And naturally, this project produced results. In other words, work on this project. We have the Grom 1 and Grom 2 now, with a range of 300 kilometers. We made it, sold it with an audit, by the way, for Saudi money, including selling it along with the technical documentation. But most likely, the intervention of our partners allowed us to get at least the technical documentation back, maybe some launchers, and possibly even some missiles as well. So we can say, what is the Grom 2? It's basically the same as the Iskander. 500 kilometers, Moscow, 2 ups, that's the 500 kilometers. That is, if there are enough ballistic missiles, then Rubliovka, remember we once talked about this, it's better for the Rubliovka elite to get as far away as possible from those bathhouses where the main decisions for further military actions in Russia are made. Why? Because the first Grom should definitely bury Lenin. Because, well, how much longer is he going to lie there after all? The Kremlin is first and Rubliovka is second, or the other way around, depending on preference. Maybe Rubliovka will actually be the first target.
Roman Nikolaevich, now of course this information has been circulating for several days in Russian propaganda channels and among Russian war correspondents, because in Russia they are claiming that the armed forces of Ukraine are attempting to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? Let's analyze it.
To understand the situation, we have about 600 kilometers of border, if you draw a straight line without the bends, between Belarus and Oskol. This is the border between Ukraine and Russia. On our side, this includes the Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions up to Oskol. On the Russian side, these are the Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod regions. For us, the main task is this borderline, to turn it into a front line, because that's the right and smart thing to do. We need to change the architecture of the front to open the northern front. It has already been opened after we started advancing toward the Kursk direction, toward Moscow, as some extremely delusional idiots call it. As part of the main task of tying down enemy forces, several tens of thousands of Russian troops were pinned down there. And of course, the creation of the so-called security zone or buffer zone, it can be called differently a support zone if it's a front line and a mine strip. We need to create such a security zone, a demilitarized zone about 30 kilometers deep into Russian territory, but the Russians denazify it. They immediately start bombarding it with aerial bombs and artillery and evacuate the civilian population from there. So that's what a buffer zone is like. It's being created, in fact, not even 30 kilometers deep. You can go in 3, 5, or 7 kilometers, but onto Russian territory to lay mines. Not our territory, but Russian territory. If you lay a few 100,000 of these mines, they'll be digging them out for 100 years, if they even bother at all. And naturally, Army artillery can add another 25 kilometers to the creation of such a buffer zone, extending it up to 30 kilometers. We did this in the Kursk direction. We accomplished it. The only retreat, as we've already mentioned, was practically a catastrophic rout, because the decision to withdraw and take up defensive positions was made too late. What we're doing now in the Belgorod region is essentially the same kind of operation, only not as deep, without an operational breakthrough. It's a tactical operation involving an incursion and the creation of such a buffer zone on Belgorod territory, taking up the best defensive positions. The thing is, there's a difference in elevation there. It's the so-called Central Russian upland. The difference in height is about 50 to 70 meters. And between, well, just so you understand, between the hills, yes. So the rivers, or rather the small streams that are there, the little creeks, they're at an elevation of about 140 meters above sea level, while the tops of these uplands are around 220 to 230 meters. So it's better to take control of these elevation changes. It doesn't matter where they are, on our side or the Russian side. If there is an opportunity to enter Russian territory to improve defensive positions, that task is carried out. Right now in the area of Demidovka, a mission is being carried out in the Belgorod direction. Well, the first issue is, of course, creating this kind of buffer zone. And the second is to try to intercept Russian reserves, which will now be freed up from the Kursk direction as we withdraw. Along the borderline, they will be redeployed to the Eastern Front, so that they don't end up in the Pokrovsk direction, where they might have about 2 divisions That's practically 30,000 Russian troops who could now be transferred from the Kursk direction to the Eastern Front. And they will be passing right by, or rather through the Belgorod region. And so in order to intercept them, I think that's why such pressure is being created right now. In the Belgorod region, the current trend is positive, at least for the moment. Of course, we can't discuss tactical matters even if we knew them. Well, you can't broadcast tactical information on air, but really, I think in a week we'll be able to talk about the results of this tactical operation.
The Russians have claimed to have allegedly shot down an F-16 over the Sumy region. The Air Force has already debunked this fake news. And as Andriy Demchenko reports, the Russians are storming the Sumy region border on ATVs. New Su aircraft are destroying their groups. What do you say, Roman Hryhorovich?
Well, they got scared by the information that came out a few days ago. There was a really good video showing the use of F-16S over Sumy. Naturally, the Russian psychological operations units responded differently, but from a logical and operational standpoint, they acted correctly. Our own information and psychological operations teams should take note and follow their example as well. After all, FSB and KGB officers have been conducting these psychological special operations for 100 years. They had to carry out such a psychological operation because the appearance of F-16S practically at the line of contact really rattled the Russians. Combat missions were carried out at extremely low altitudes, most likely involving the release of certain munitions below the Russian radar horizon. Naturally, no one could reach it with air defense, and this really shook the Russians in that direction. Of course, they had to counter this information, so they made up another story about shooting down an F-16. Believe me, in that direction, no one shot anything down. I have enough friends who would have shared the information if something had happened, and I can confidently say that no one shot anything down. The guys are working along the entire line of contact, both on F-16s and Mirages. Well, they've already started carrying out their combat missions in those specific directions where it's truly possible, based on the significant density of the enemy's air defenses and our own inherent ability to effectively cover these valuable aircraft. God's due. Go ahead and fill in the blanks yourself so I don't have to swear too much. This so-called God's race, in Trump's eyes, the one Putin organized. For what purpose? Well, in order to create a certain amount of pressure. The Ukrainian side is running the same kind of IPSO, an information psychological special operation, in which top officials are involved. This is a serious state operation. For what purpose? To give the Russian population, primarily the Russian population, and of course Trump and those in Ukraine, the chance to try to suppress or paint a different picture of the real events on Kursk soil. We're holding Kursk land. No one is surrounded there. We're holding on. And the retreat, yes, the retreat was indeed delayed, not a rout. If a month and a half ago, as we said, there had been an organized withdrawal, then it would have been a controlled move to defensive lines. It was a route, but still to defensive lines located on Russian territory. That's the difference we were talking about. The Sudzha River in Kursk, well, along the Kurshina, which runs there, the Pereplyuika stream, but its elevation is 140 meters above sea level. There are heights just to the south. Somewhere the elevation already reaches 220 meters. So here there's at least a 50 to 70 meter rise, and this is Kursk land. On these heights, our units that withdrew from the Sudzha direction have taken up positions, and at this point, no one intends to retreat any further. Naturally, the Russians need to show that our forces are surrounded there, that everything is lost. Boss, the client is leaving, the cast is coming off, everything is lost, and so on and so forth. They're trying to cut us off, but they're still very far from encircling us. It's simply unrealistic because along the borderline there are these ridges, and our troops are positioned there as well, of course. I don't think we'll be leaving the Kursk region. There's a good defensive line there. And the Russians who are trying to cut off our direction have gotten stuck in the Basovka area. So yes, that's the Sumy region, Sumy territory, and it's only a few kilometers away. From the borderline, nothing more. They're trying to somehow break through and cut off the supply to this group. But in the information space, to somehow ramp up the pressure, well, Putin threw out some sweet nothings, let's put it mildly, tossed them to Trump, and now Trump is just mirroring him. What else can he do? Right now, he's tied to Putin, to his non-involvement in that adventure they started together with Netanyahu in the Middle East. Once again, strikes are being carried out against the Houthis, against Gaza, against Lebanon, against Syria. Naturally, if the Russians decide to make their voice heard there, it won't end well for anyone involved. That's for sure. Most likely strikes against Iran in the Middle East are ahead, and Trump has been dragged into them, and now they have nowhere to go. Well, Witkov got involved, and after all, he's such a great Israeli-American, or maybe an American-Israeli. That's why Russian oil refineries of all kinds and at all levels will keep burning. Maybe not with the same intensity, and it might be presented a bit differently. Not sanctions, for example, or the actions of the Ukrainian defense forces, but the work of local underground groups at various levels. I think that this kind of work by our informants, by the way, could be just as effective as the Ukrainian defense forces are now. And believe me, tens of millions of Ukrainians will definitely not stop fighting for their land, for their sovereignty, for their territorial integrity. And you won't be able to turn around several million residents of Donetsk, Luhansk, or Crimea.
Dear audience, please like this video. Leave a few kind words in the comments to support the armed forces of Ukraine. Write what you think about this situation overall. Renowned analyst Roman Svitan, Roman Grigorievich, thank you, and as always, see you next week.
Goodbye.